Hello, I'm Angie Bezick, and I serve as the Vice Chair of Legislative Affairs Committee for the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance Business Council. And I'm with Tom Cosgrove, who serves as the Vice Chair of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. And we are delighted today to have Senator Mark Warner, who is our incumbent candidate for U.S. Senate, here to talk to us about the issues that are important to the business community here on the peninsula. Thank you so much for making time for us today. We'll have 5 questions for you related to workforce, military, transportation, healthcare, and the economy. But first, if you just take a couple minutes and share a little bit about yourself for our viewers.
Well, Angie and Tom, thank you for having me, and thank you to the Chamber and to the Business Council for giving me this opportunity. I am asking people of Virginia to hire me one more time as United States Senator. For those of you who don't know me well, my background was over 30 years in business as a business leader here in Virginia, where my companies, I was in venture capital, I was in technology, helped to create thousands of jobs across Virginia and across the country. I then went into public service, where I had the opportunity to serve as governor of Virginia. And in a bipartisan way, worked together to earn Virginia national recognition, where we were named the best managed state, the best state for business, and the best state in which to receive a public education from preschool to graduate school, something I'm very proud of. I then went to the United States Senate, and I'm proud of my record there as well. 55 of my bills have become law of the land. All of those bills have been worked on in a bipartisan fashion. It includes improving Medicare for seniors with chronic illnesses. It includes legislation to help preserve, as Tom knows, a 2-carrier buy, preserving over 25,000 defense-related jobs on Hampton Roads. It includes working on things like, that may not get a lot of attention, but like security clearance reform, which again, with our military and defense contractor community is extremely important. Getting paid family leave, again, for folks on the intelligence committee. I serve as vice chair of the intelligence committee. Just last month, I'm very proud of the fact, something again, I think that's very important for the peninsula. I worked 3.5 years on a legislation called the Great American Outdoors Act, which makes a record investment in our national parks. And in addition to that backlog of maintenance in our national parks that will correct, that will add 10,000 jobs across Virginia. Many of those jobs in the peninsula. We know the challenges at the Colonial Parkway. We know the challenges around our national battlefields. This $6 billion investment will be extremely sizable. I'm asking respectfully for people to hire me again, because I think I brought that record of service, whether it be finding common ground of working together. I guess I'm still at heart a business guy. You got to get to yes. And that's the record I've worked on as governor and as senator. I think COVID, which has obviously put a strain on all of us, I hope everyone who's watching this is safe, but in many ways, COVID has advanced the move to a more technology, digital economy, 10 years in 6 months. And as we'll get into these questions, there are many things that I think we've not done well in response to COVID. And we are going to need to come out of this both in a way we reopen our economy, we open it safely, but also realize that some of the needs like high-speed broadband connectivity and new focus on retraining is critically important.
Well, Senator, thank you for those introductory remarks. And even in those remarks, you've already mentioned the defense industry, which certainly is of major importance in Hampton Roads. And during his 2016 campaign, then candidate Trump advocated for a, quote, giant rebuilding of the armed services. And over the past 4 years, there have been defense spending budgets well over $700 billion and some investments in some long-range initiatives. And so our question is, regardless of the outcome of this year's presidential race, would you support the continued efforts to rebuild the armed services? If so, how would you plan to fund the rebuilding given the increasing costs of military personnel and acquisition? And if not, where would you see cuts in the defense budget, and how would you prioritize that spending?
Well, Tom, as you know, I've been an advocate for uh, increased and appropriate defense spending my whole time in the United States Senate. I've worked closely with the shipyards on issues like the two-carrier buy. We need to make sure that we keep our nation the strongest in the world. I've was very proud last year that we saw the largest pay increase in our military pay in many years. I've also believed very strongly that our commitment to military needs not to end when you finish your active duty. It's why I'm a strong advocate of commitment to our veterans, and I've been a big advocate of increased funding for our vets. We're going to build a facility on the south side that'll take off some of the pressure on the Hampton facility. I've been a strong advocate of how we get vets, as people move from the military into the workforce, how we make sure those transitions are easier. I'm very proud of the fact that I've got a bipartisan bill that just passed the Senate to take on the issue of veteran suicide, which is a national tragedy. So which would put additional funds, frankly, hundreds of millions of dollars into our nonprofits to connect those veterans who may not be connected with the VA, to get them the mental health services they need. In terms of our priorities, while I do think the Navy is clearly the most important, I worry at times that the length of our acquisition cycle is way too long. And I increasingly worry that with an emerging challenges like China, and this is where I've spent a lot of my focus, that we're going to need a military going forward that is more nimble, that is more cyber focused, that realizes that many of our threats may be an overhead, and that frankly, we need to not only have a strong military, but we need to have strong cyber defenses. We need to also recognize that if we're going to keep America the strongest, we've got to make more investment in basic technology R&D, because increasingly, China is setting the standards around advanced technology. I see it in 5G. We're seeing in China try to play that out in artificial intelligence, quantum computing. That, I believe, is a national security threat and has to be addressed. Over the short term, I've been concerned for some time about long-term budget issues, but I think with the interest rates at a record low, in the short term, both in terms of additional investments in our domestic economy, we need to make those additional investments in our military economy as well. But I would look at the acquisition cycle and see if we can shorten that, and potentially look at not as many new military systems. I think we need to move more towards constantly upgrading our software rather than simply making regular hardware adjustments.
Great. Senator, under the assumption that we would have a vaccine for COVID-19 by the end of the year, and with the notion that all states and countries even might be on a level playing field as a result of the pandemic, what 2 or 3 things do you think that Virginia should be doing now to prepare for, being the first out of the gate to accelerate our economy and thrive? And what do you think our business leaders should be preparing for in order to make Virginia the role model for a quick, successful economic recovery?
Remember, this is something, as somebody who spent 30 years in business and earned Virginia this top ranked spot for best state in the country for business, we need to make sure we keep a low tax base, a relatively low regulatory burden. But I want to really take on the question, though, for a moment about COVID. COVID's obviously been an enormous challenge, and I've been gravely disappointed by this White House's response to it. 6.5 months in, we still don't have a national testing strategy. 6.5 months in, I was talking to somebody in a nursing home the other day. They were still buying masks off the black market in China. I mean, that's crazy. 6.5 months after Pearl Harbor, we were the arsenal of the West. I think that the administration, by not using the Defense Production Act, has failed to mobilize America's innovation and economy to take on both the needs on PPE and testing. And while I have great respect for my opponent's service and sacrifice to our country, this is an area where I disagree with my opponent greatly. He's called wearing masks a sign of tyranny? I think it's a sign of listening to the science. He thinks that President Trump has done a great job managing the coronavirus. I think it has been, in many ways, an unfortunate failure and cost people's lives and hurt our economy. I also worry that that same effort to try to politicize the race to a vaccination. I think the CDC and the FDA should never be subject to political interference. And I want there to be a vaccine, but I want to make sure that Dr. Fauci says it's okay, and I'll be the first in line to take it. But I'm gravely concerned about the diminution of how Americans view the FDA and CDC. On the economy, let me talk about a couple things. First, Virginia and nationwide, one of the things the pandemic has shown is that we need broadband across the Commonwealth. We need it across the country. It is not a nice to have, it's an economic necessity. When I was governor, we put in more rural broadband than any state in the country. We need to finish building that high-speed broadband connections out across the Commonwealth. The first state that does that will have an economic advantage. Second, we need to leverage the already intellectual capital that we've got from our military and assets like Jefferson Lab, JLab, and we're working with DOE on this. There was a great opportunity for us to have JLab working with our military, particularly folks like the shipyards and others, as kind of the training ground for the workforce around all advanced DOE type activities. And we're having those kind of conversations right now. And while we didn't get the ion electron collider, we're going to get over 30% of that work with Brookhaven. So very important in terms of building up the peninsula's technology capabilities. Third is, I think there is, and I think Dominion has made a change on this now, there is a chance for Virginia to be a leader in cleaner energy. We're going to have the biggest wind farm off the East Coast shortly in Virginia. And we can be, because this is the one time when having the tunnels is actually an asset, because if you had bridges, you couldn't get the wind-spans of those blades out. We could make that manufacturing hub. And I have this great image of saying Appalachia, that fueled America's economy in the 20th century with coal, could be the place where we build the wind turbines, the solar panels. And again, I think Virginia now, in conjunction with our utilities, we could actually be a dramatic leader. And then there are a whole host of other areas, whether we think about Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia, where I think, again, Virginia can be a leader. Big data is a hugely growing area. We still have 35,000 unfilled jobs in cybersecurity. We need more investment there. I've been a big advocate, as somebody who got into the wireless industry early, of saying Virginia should be the leader in autonomous vehicles, whether we're talking about drones, where we're doing a lot of work in Blacksburg, driverless vehicles, driverless cars, which has still got a ways to go, but we've got as more actual track in Virginia than Michigan. When you add up what we've got in Northern Virginia, Blacksburg, and even some facilities down in Danville, unmanned submarines, unmanned marine activities, again, Navy and the shipyards has a great combination. So I think we need to accelerate this move towards a more digital and tech-based economy. At the same time, and final comment here, because I could go for, this is my sweet spot, I could go for a long time, but we can't walk away though from some of our traditional industries. In the peninsula, tourism has been and will be a long-term value add. That's why the Great American Outdoors Act, which makes that record investment in our national parks, was so important for rebounding that tourism industry. And I might just add as well, one of the things that, two of the things just we need to do to come out of this is, I do believe we need additional COVID relief. I believe we need additional support for small businesses. I believe we do need state and local government assistance. We're pretty efficient in Virginia. We got a AAA bond rating, but we shouldn't be firing teachers and firefighters and other local workers because they've been revenue starved during this pandemic. So there are additional support mechanisms to make sure that we can, as we get a vaccine, we don't dig the hole deeper in terms of having small businesses close, having state and local governments flounder. Why I've been so supportive, actually, with the bill on over $100 billion for independent restaurants. I'm not sure that's going to get fully funded, but there are a whole lot of businesses that are really, really struggling at this point. Matter of fact, I've never seen a bigger disconnect between the stock market and the real economy than at this moment. And I say that as somebody who spent 30 years in business.
Thank you, Senator. The next topic is workforce. And as you know, the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, WIOA, has been critical in upskilling underemployed workers and providing career opportunities for unemployed individuals. It's due to be reauthorized in 2021. And so we wanted to ask, what do you see as the current successes and challenges of WIOA? And what, if any, changes to the policy would you prioritize in reauthorization?
Well, let me say three things on this. This is workforce training has been a priority of mine since I've been governor. And while I think we've made some progress, we still have way too many workforce training programs. There needs to be further consolidation. We need to give more flexibility to the local boards, and you know, the different revenue streams need to be consolidated so you can really partner with business. Again, the shipyards and ship repair has actually been kind of a national champion on some of the programs that are put in place. But in terms of a federal reauthorization, consolidation, more flexibility with the funding, and making sure that it's more of those decisions are made at a local basis, number one. Number two, one of the things that we also need to do is acknowledge that one of the things that COVID has displayed is, disparities, racial disparities in our healthcare system, but also economic disparities. And we're seeing, unfortunately, Black-owned businesses, other minority businesses, women-owned businesses did not participate as well in the PPP program as others. Not because there was something wrong with the program or the banks didn't want it, they just didn't have those established banking relationships. So in the next relief package, and I've got support of the Treasury Secretary, I've got the Republican banking chair, this will get in, if we get another COVID package, would be a significant investment in community development financial institutions that would invest in those minority businesses, which unfortunately, because many times they're started bootstrapped up without a traditional banking relationship, we've lost 440,000 Black-owned businesses in America. We've got to find ways to make more equality of access to capital. And CDFI investment would be one tool for Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, Latino-owned businesses, because that's a big chunk of the workforce. And you've got to have that access to capital to keep the whole gamut of small businesses funded. And then finally, and here's an idea that I've been working on for some time, but it's going to need a bigger push to become reality. I want to do more than the traditional workforce training. We got to realize that about a third of the jobs that we've lost from COVID are not coming back. This is, again, this move to a digital economy is just accelerated destruction of certain jobs that might have taken 10 years to get destroyed, got destroyed over 6 months. So we need a dramatic new rethinking of investment, how we invest in human capital. So I would suggest changes. I would suggest the creation of the equivalent of an R&D tax credit for businesses that actually invest in their workforce in terms of upskilling and training. Let me give you the specific example. We need to change the tax, accounting, and reporting processes for investments in human beings, particularly low and moderate income human beings. Right now, we've got the craziness that if a company buys a robot for $5,000, they get an R&D tax credit. The robot's an asset you can put on your balance sheet and you can report it if you're a public company. If that same company spends $5,000 training 2 human beings to be more efficient than the robot, you don't get a tax credit. You can write it off, but you don't get a tax credit. It's viewed as a cost and there's no reporting. Let's treat investment in human beings at least as good as we treat investment in R&D and tangible goods. This is a broad, big idea. It is bipartisan. I've been working with the current SEC and they are moving forward on human capital reporting. This area of how we train the workforce on a massive way is probably one of the most significant issues that we face in our country, and it has an opportunity to be extraordinarily bipartisan.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes left.
So much for me getting through these questions quickly.
Right,
I apologize.
right. Well, we'll get through mine anyway. I have a 2-part question on healthcare. Do you support or oppose appealing the Affordable Care Act? And regardless of that position, what specific ideas do you have to expand access to healthcare, keep costs down and ensure that healthcare delivery system is financially stable or sustainable.
Yeah, listen, the Affordable Care Act was not perfect, but I think it was a step in the right direction. 20 million Americans got healthcare coverage, 3.5 million Virginians who had pre-existing conditions, including my daughter, got coverage. I think it was right to expand Medicaid, which covers now 400,000 Virginians. And this is an area, again, where I have a dramatic difference with my opponent, who has constantly criticized me for supporting the ACA. He even said expansion of Medicaid was like giving a child a cookie. I couldn't disagree with him more. He says he's for preserving protections with pre-existing conditions, but you can't have it both ways. You can't be against the ACA, kind of the repeal and replace, and have some secret plan when all of the disease groups, the Cancer Society, the Diabetes Association says, without the kind of ability for everyone to buy in, you can't preserve those protections for folks with pre-existing condition. So simply saying it without a plan is just not fair or I believe accurate. Let me tell you specifically what I would do. One, in terms of bringing down healthcare costs, I would allow the government, like every other industrial nation, to negotiate drug prices so that we shouldn't be paying 5 and 10 times more for our drugs in America than any other industrial nation in the world. I'd hope President Trump was going to move on this item, but I think it's time to go ahead and practice what other nations have already done. Second, I would go ahead, and I've been proposing it for some time, to allow, if you have appropriate consumer protections, insurance plans to be sold across state lines, so there's more competition. You got to put those consumer protections in, but I totally favor that. Third, I would believe we need to end the practice of surprise medical billings. I'm sure most of the people who have viewed this, many of you have probably got that surprise bill. I have it as well. We need to end that practice. And four, we really do need, Affordable Care Act was about coverage. It wasn't nearly as much about cost containment. And we still, unfortunately, in many of our healthcare systems have way too many inefficiencies. The one area that actually I think will be both good for healthcare and good for cost containment that has come out of COVID has been the dramatic, 10x increased use of telehealth. Telehealth is a huge opportunity to help bring down healthcare costs, increase access, and particularly if we can combine that with technology on managing those individuals with chronic diseases. I think we all know only about 5% of the population account for about 50% of the healthcare costs. Chronic disease management, telehealth, and technology are tools that can bring down and frankly improve the quality of life for folks with those chronic illnesses.
Very good. The final question on transportation, I'm going to try to cut down, so I'm not sure I can even read this whole question in 5 minutes, but we have an interwoven transportation system with ports, public transit, airports, roads, bridges, tunnels, etc. And they're all governed by different authorities, levels of government, et cetera, and even private entities, and they all have some disparate funding streams that provide for them. And so the question is, to address all of these challenges that our transportation system faces, particularly as localities and regions expand into mega regions, how do we create a structure where the puzzle pieces fit into an interwoven and more functional transportation system?
Well, Tom, that's been the issue for decades. Part of that is state streams versus federal streams versus our public-private streams. I do think, we've seen movements in Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia towards regional transportation authorities. I think that's generally is a step in the right direction, number one. Number two, I think the federal government needs to step up and do more on transportation. I think one of the things that's almost become a joke in Washington the last couple of years has been, every other week the administration says it's going to be infrastructure week. Well, whether President Trump's reelected or Mr. Biden's elected, we need to make that commitment of, I believe, at least $1 trillion infrastructure plan investment. And if that requires a slight increase in the gas tax, I think it needs to be included. As somebody who fought for increased funding for transportation with a referendum, almost 20 years ago and got beat, I know people don't, always like to pay for their transportation improvements, but the federal government has to pay its share. And I do think one of the tools that we need to put in the tool shed is that we are the only major industrial nation that doesn't have a national infrastructure bank. I call it an infrastructure financing authority, but I've got a broadly based bipartisan plan, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, that would give us access to the capital markets when we've got interest rates at record lows, not bringing down 50-year, 30 and 40 and 50-year money to help fund these long-term infrastructure investments, I think is a mistake. And we've done a lot of that public-private at the state level, but we've not really been able to leverage at a more national level. Again, I think there's a bipartisan infrastructure type bank proposal. So as somebody who is, again, spent my adult life in Virginia and have wrestled with the transportation hassles of the bridges and, constant construction on 64 for most of my adult life, we can and must do better, and it's going to have to be multimodal. One of the things, the final point I'd also make is, we do need to think about transportation infrastructure in a way where some of our commuting patterns may permanently change as people think about, living and working in different ways. We've seen you can work remotely. I think we need to factor that in. And final point, I made this point earlier, but if we're going to, any infrastructure plan going forward beyond bridges, tunnels, rail, roads, has to include broadband. We need to make the same commitment in 2021 going forward that Roosevelt made in 1930s. If we could give ubiquitous rural electricity, we need to make sure we've got ubiquitous broadband.
Very good. Well, I think we got it all in. Senator Angie and I, on behalf of our 3 chamber sponsors, really thank you for taking the time to speak with us today and share your views on these important issues. And we look forward to sharing this conversation with our Peninsula business community.
Well, Tom and Angie, let me thank you. And again, I think Virginians know me. I think they know my record. I think they know I've got a record of being bipartisan. Respectfully, I'd love to earn your vote to keep serving. It's been the honor of my life to be governor and senator, and I hope you'll give me the chance to continue.